From Columbia in high definition, this is WIS News 10 Awareness.
This morning on Awareness, the road paved by blood, sweat, tears, and the sacrifice of so many to bring us to where we are today. Selma, Birmingham, Little Rock, Rock Hill, South Carolina, Good morning and thank you for joining us for Awareness. I'm your host, Megan Norman. On January 31st, 1961, in Rock Hill, South Carolina, 10 protesters walked a mile from Friendship Junior College to McCrory's Variety Store. It was a trip that would change their lives forever. They took a seat at the segregated lunch counter, not just asking for a meal, but demanding equality. They were arrested for trespassing and disturbing the peace. The sit-in was one of many during the civil rights movement. But on that day, the tactic changed. The 9 young black men, the Friendship 9, chose prison instead of paying their bail. Now fast forward to more than half a century after they were jeered, roughed up, and jailed for being black at a whites-only restaurant. The Friendship 9 have been freed, not from the York County prison camp where they were sentenced to 30 days hard labor, but free of the criminal conviction from a justice system that formally admitted its mistake. Jack Kinsey takes us back to that day.
The crowd was too big to handle in what anyone would consider a large courtroom, so the spectators spilled over to a nearby meeting room, running out of seats there too. Just one indicator of how many people have waited for this moment in Rock Hill, South Carolina, and civil rights history. And then it arrived. Attorney and historical figure in his own right, former state Supreme Court Chief Justice Ernest Finney asking this city court to vacate the charges against the protesters who became the Friendship 9. Finney understood the case better than anyone. He was one of the group's lawyers when they were sent to jail for daring to order food and drinks at a segregated East Main Street lunch counter in 1961. Solicitor Kevin Brackett.
There is only one reason these men were arrested. There's only one reason that they were charged and convicted for trespassing, and that is because they were black. That could not happen today. It was wrong then, it's wrong today.
It didn't take long for Circuit Judge John Hayes, nephew of the 1961 sentencing judge, to approve the motion.
Defendant's motion for a new trial based on after-discovered evidence is granted. The defendant's convictions for trespassing in January of 1961 are vacated, null, void, and set aside.
Later, reaction from the Friendship 9's Clarence Graham and others praising their courage and commitment.
There's so much going on in the world today. Young people, I say to you, you need to think about that. 54 years later, we're proving you can't be successful or you can't get the job done with nonviolence.
This is a monumental day for not just civil rights, but human rights and human dignity.
As the judge issued his ruling vacating the cases of the Friendship 9, Judge John Hayes summed up the court action saying, quote, "We can't rewrite history, but we can write history." One of the brave young men who fought for equality on January 31st, 1961 is Mr. Clarence Graham. Thank you for being with us this morning.
My pleasure.
When did the idea come to this group that January 31st, 1961 was the day?
Early in the summer of 1960, we were visited by a member of CORE, Tom Gaither, the Congress of Racial Equality. He was the field secretary for the organization. They had met in Atlanta, and the jail no bail idea was tossed around, but no one seemed interested. So he, being a Great Falls, South Carolina native, came to Friendship College that summer to talk to us about it. We had on the campus already student chapters in NAACP and SNCC, but we had not got involved with CORE. So he came in and talked to us. After a few weeks, we were ready. We thought, that we should be the ones, or we were interested enough to find out more about it.
Right.
The main thing, we had to be nonviolent, and we had to train to be nonviolent.
Right. What was some of that training like?
Well, it was difficult. We called it sensitivity training. We would get in a room, 35 or 40 men, and we would just curse each other, spit on them, kick them, call the N-word. We had to reenact the same thing happened to us when we were picketing and we were sitting in. So we could toughen ourselves up so we would not strike back.
Right. Did that deter anyone, that training? Did that deter
oh,
anyone
yes,
from actually participating?
We had, I think, 47 to 50 people at the beginning of the summer, down to 10 that showed up the next morning. That morning, we met the night before, we had 40 people, and we had 10 the next morning. So it did. And it's good because everyone couldn't, be trained. You had to train, you don't become nonviolent overnight.
Right.
And we made sure that no one would step out of line, because things were happening. It was real turbulent times then.
Right. Well, describe that moment when you sat down at that lunch counter.
Well, people obviously sat down. In my case, I didn't get a chance to sit down. Before I could really take my seat, I was snatched up by the police officer, thrown to the floor, literally dragged out of the store, out the back door to the jailhouse, which was about 100 yards away. It was a frightening experience. We didn't know what to expect. We knew this would be something that would be a first-time thing for us, different. So there are a lot of emotions, fear, anxiety. But at the end, we think it was worth it. But we were afraid at the beginning.
And you had already prepared for this jail, no bail movement, but did you really know what to expect when it came to serving time in prison and that hard labor you had to endure?
No, none of us had been arrested before, so we couldn't imagine on what we had heard, and we had heard the worst. But the thing was the uncertainty of what could happen, because prisoners were being killed or becoming missing all the time during those days.
Right.
And black men were being lynched and everything else. They'd run across in front of my home before that even happened. So we didn't know what to expect, but when we got to prison, we were 17, 18-year-old kids.
Right. Well, and you said earlier that it takes practice, it takes training to become nonviolent. That doesn't happen overnight. When you see the violence that's happening now in Baltimore, when you see the violence happening across the country, what is your reaction to that? Is that progress? Is that making a statement? Is it making things any better?
No, it sickens me to see it. We lost so much ground going back there. We try not to get involved verbally with cases that are open like these, because they're still an investigation.
Right.
And we only know what the news is telling us. So we try not to make any, I personally, and we don't as a group, make any statements that we can't back up. We simply say this, and we encourage kids. Nonviolence is the way. We've proven that. We were the only successful movement from the 60s where there was no bloodshed. And we feel proud about that. I think we need a cool-off period is needed, and I'm glad that they called a curfew, or they need to back off now. And you got to find somebody to talk.
Right.
You got to talk. Both sides got to talk now. Picketing, demonstrating is fine if you got all the facts together, and if everybody's agreeable, there's going to be a peaceful. But see, when you don't have the control of the crowds, and it's not going to work.
But do you think there needs to be a period where a concept, an idea, a community is torn down, so to speak, in order to be rebuilt, in order to heal?
I don't know. I never felt that, even in the 60s too, that we need to destroy our communities, our own neighbors. It's foolish. Our own communities to get a point over to someone else.
Right.
No, that doesn't make sense. And that's why I say you need to have consensus of the group before you protest. We never allow people to come on our picket line who had some disagreements. Or you had to prove yourself.
Right.
Because we didn't want one person could start a riot, everybody get killed.
You had to have a consensus.
Consensus of the group. This is going to be a peaceful protest, and we all had with the same mind.
Right.
If not, they don't need to have it.
Well, and let's play a quick soundbite from one of the surviving members, Deb Massey, who talked a little bit about the training to prepare for that sit-in.
We needed to be trained in the area of civil disobedience, and I didn't really think that it was necessary. I thought, well, maybe this is something that's far-reaching. I don't need to get involved with it. It might tarnish me or whatever. But Robert McCullough, the only member of the Friendship Nine that passed away, was deceased, he said to me, Dub Massey, you've got to go to training because this is going to be monumental.
This is going to be monumental. Did you feel that at that moment when you were preparing for that?
And like Dub said, Robert was, I guess, one of our leaders, the smallest from the group, but he had a lot of wisdom. And he said, this is going to be big. We had no idea. We talked about 54 years later, had no idea. And he'd be gone, but we knew that something had to be done. We were tired of being treated the way we were treated. And this seemed the way that we could help. We didn't have jobs, but the way we thought it would, the impact would for us, our feeling is that we could do something for the movement even though we didn't have jobs, or we didn't call it shots. We would hurt their pockets. Then they would have to feed us and take care of us. At the same time, they would be getting paid. So that part we had figured out. We didn't know what would happen, how the community, they were supporting us, most of them. But
well, Mr. Graham, we're going to have much more with you. I know there's so much more to this story. We'll take a quick break and come right back.
Thank you, ma'am.
Still to come on Awareness.
Stand for the right to be free. Together we must stand true.
The story of the men with no fear for freedom takes the stage for the first time in Colombia.
Now, y'all know we don't serve your kind here. Now get out. Now go on.
The story of Friendship 9 made its way from Rock Hill to a stage in Colombia. No Fear for Freedom, the musical, created an opportunity for a new generation to learn this part of history, but also contribute to bringing the first civil rights museum to Colombia. Chad Mills has the story.
Ain't gonna let nobody know. Turn me around. We gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, walking to the promised land.
It's a surreal experience for the Friendship 9.
Honey, now you're too young to understand. Those colors will never be satisfied.
Surreal is a good way to describe it because I never had any expectations that it would go this far.
Now y'all know we don't serve your kind here.
The musical that tells the story of the Friendship 9 makes its debut in Colombia. Dub Massey is one of the 8 surviving friends.
The whole ride has been exciting, even from the time that we were 18 and we did what we did.
The 9 refused to move from a segregated lunch counter in Rock Hill in 1961 and took jail time for the offense. The civil disobedience sparked the Jail No Bail movement. Massey and others could have paid a $100 fine, but they chose to spend 30 days in jail instead to protest Jim Crow.
I'd never been to jail. In fact, I'm a preacher's kid, so I didn't get in trouble. I was close to it most of the time, but not in it.
Together we must stand for the right to be free.
But this musical serves a bigger purpose, a fundraiser to build a museum in Colombia that will remember the Friendship 9 and other heroes of the civil rights movement in South Carolina.
It's tremendously important because, how are you going to remember your history if you don't have anything to show?
We can't forget our history. That's what's wrong now, that we had so much history in the state that wasn't documented and nothing to show for it.
Mary Skinner Jones is leading up the effort.
We want to make our museum interactive. We still have some living legend, and we designed our art education program around history.
Once this museum is up and running, and it's going to be a cultural arts center as well, I predict it's going to be one of the top tourist destinations in the state.
Kimberly Johnson, a children's author who also wrote the book which inspired the play, joins us now. Kimberly, this play elicits so many emotions. It's like a roller coaster.
It
is. Anger and tears and joy. Why write the book, first of all, and then why make a musical?
Well, the reason I wrote the book, No Fear for Freedom, is because I wanted to make sure that we did not forget these important stories that happened right here in South Carolina. And I was very embarrassed when I met the Friendship Nine that I didn't know the story about what they had done in 1961. It was so pivotal to the movement. So I was very upset that I didn't know about the story. And I felt if I was the one who didn't know, there were other people around who didn't know. So the stories had to be told. And I'd never written a nonfiction. This was my first nonfiction book. I'd written other children's stories, but this was a challenge. But again, the stories have to be told.
And why in a musical format?
Well, you know, we know that children learn, and even adults, we learn in different ways, and our attention span sometimes is very short. So to sit down and read a book may be challenging for some, but if you can bring it to life in a visual manner, in an auditory manner, it really hits home with what the message is, and I did not want this message to get lost. So we had to find a way to relay what happened in 1961 in a broader format.
Right. Well, let's take a listen to an emotional moment from the play.
Is it even worth it, God? Or are we making ourselves look like fools with no power? What's getting ready to happen to them boys? Where they drag them off to? Will I ever see my brothers again? God, you gotta help us, God.
An emotional monologue shortly after the Friendship Nine were taken from the counter. Mr. Graham, when you watched that play, particularly that scene, what were your emotions?
They were very, very strong. It was so factual. It took me back. And like I said, we were actually dragged off the seats and down the floor. So I mean, I went back there. I've seen it 7 times, and each time I go right back there.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of emotions that we experience: anger, even pain. Yeah. Yeah.
And Kimberly, what is the main message you want audiences to leave with, especially when you look at the current climate we're dealing with across the country?
I think the biggest message for the production is that we can't have any fear for freedom. We've got to know what it is that we need to do and stand up for that right to have the freedom. But more importantly, we've got to start bridging the gaps between generations. You know, we have a wonderful older generation in our state and throughout the country and the world that I don't think we're tapping into, particularly with our young folk. And when they can tap into that knowledge that our older generation brings, they can learn how to strategically stand up for what they believe in, just like the Friendship Nine did. So bridging the gaps between generations and also not being afraid to stand up for what's right.
Powerful book, even more powerful play. I know there are some viewers who are asking, well, when is it coming back? When can I see it again? Any thoughts on that? Well,
we definitely want to bring it back to Columbia. The Township Auditorium and the Renaissance Foundation were tremendous hosts and hostesses for this project, so we'd love to come back here for sure. So we're hoping that if we get enough feedback from folks in the Columbia and surrounding areas that we can bring it back here so more people can see it, because that museum has to be built. It's a wonderful cause.
Right, absolutely. Well, we'll have more from our 2 guests coming up after the break, but when awareness returns, the man who stood by the Friendship Nine in the courtroom.
That I leave a reputation of doing the best I could with whatever opportunities were afforded and opened up. And it was enjoyable. It's been a pleasure. It's been a great trip.
Honoring Justice Ernest Finney Jr., his impact on this case and his legacy in South Carolina. Welcome back to Awareness. One of the men who defended the Friendship Nine had to overcome his own barriers. Ernest Finney Jr. started practicing law in the 1950s. He worked as a civil rights attorney and became the first African American since Reconstruction to serve as Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court. He has also been inducted into the South Carolina Hall of Fame. His accolades are impressive, as is his impact on the state, but his successes were not without challenges.
I didn't have any idea where I was going to end up, because times were hard, things were difficult. Back in the days when we first started the practice of law, I would take clients to the courthouse to let them see that I could go into the courthouse and open the law books.
Clearly, he had his own challenges that he had to overcome, just like the Friendship 9. Why is it important that we honor Justice Finney in the work that you all are doing?
Because these are the icons that paved the way. I mean, it's wonderful to pay homage to the great icons that we all know. Dr. Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Thurgood Marshall, all of the great icons, Eleanor Roosevelt. But what about the local people that did tremendous things, such as Judge Finney? And we've got to make sure that we recognize that there are local icons here that helped pave the way, because all of us are standing on their shoulders.
Absolutely. And Mr. Graham, quickly, how was it working with Justice Finney?
I agree. He was a very, very thorough and well-respected young attorney. He was a little shocked when we said we were going to stay in prison, though. He wasn't prepared for that.
Yeah.
But he was very supportive, and he was one of the ones that over the years I've admired. Right. He's a very learned man, respectful man.
Absolutely. Well, Mr. Graham, Mrs. Johnson, thank you so much for being with us this morning. We really appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
We'll be right back with a final thought. My final thought today is inspired by words from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham jail on April 16, 1963. When we see the marches, the anger, the unrest, we are all responsible for pursuing justice and peace. Dr. King wrote, "You may well ask, why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, and so forth? Isn't negotiation a better path? You are quite right in calling for negotiation. Indeed, this is the very purpose of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and foster such a tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seeks so to dramatize the issue that it can no longer be ignored. As Americans, we cannot afford to be silent on issues that demand our action." Until next time, I'm Megan Norman. This is Awareness.